All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. What we're going to be talking about today is the financial report of the budget. So this is the MS-535. And what we're going to be talking about is the process as a whole. So that'll be accessing the interface, going through your expenditures and revenues, entering tax commitment, long-term debt, the balance sheet, and so on. And then I will talk about the actual submission of the 535. The good thing is that for 2021, there are no changes. So if you've done a 535 in the past, if you've been through this process, it's exactly the same, which is definitely a good thing because there has been enough going on the last year or so. So first, just a quick overview of the tax rate setting process. It starts off at the beginning of the year with the drafting of your warrant articles. And if you're a city, these are called resolutions usually. It's just a terminology difference. They behave the same way in the portal. And these warrant articles or resolutions are what we build your proposed budget from. So this is your 636, your 737, so on. And out of this, in the database, we have your proposed appropriations and your estimated revenues. Those proposed appropriations are what go to annual meeting and become your appropriations as voted. And then right around this time of year, you have the opportunity to revise those initial estimated revenues that you used on your proposed budget. And it's these two pieces, the appropriations as voted or as approved, and all of your offsetting revenues that feed into the tax rate setting process, along with some data from the equalization portal that tells us how much your community is worth. So out of that, we can calculate your mill rate. Now at the end of the year, so end of the fiscal year, end of the calendar year, you file a financial report with the DRA. This is what has your actual expenditures and your actual revenues and so forth. And that's exactly what we're going to be covering today. So it's just this final piece of the process. So the 535 is a little unique. Most other pieces of the tax rate process and other workflows in the portal, usually it's just a town administrator who's logging in it and doing the whole thing. The 535 actually has a workflow that can involve auditors, because many of you have financial auditing firms that do a lot of this for you. So the typical workflow, like everything else in the portal, would be for the municipal administrator to complete the 535 and just submit it directly to the DRA. If you do have an auditor, the auditor usually kicks off the process. So they prepare the 535 and they submit it back to you, the administrator. So they don't submit it to the DRA. So if you get a notification that it was submitted by your auditor, that just means that they're signing off that they're done and it's your turn to review it. So the administrator is still responsible for the review and the submission. Now, the auditor and the admin can still make changes. So the auditor submits it to you, you start your review, you find a problem. Both you and the auditor can make adjustments at that point. So nothing's locked out. Now, if down the road the DRA finds issues with the 535, they're going to flag it for resubmission. So you would get a notification about that, which basically resets the 535 so that you can make the correction and then resubmit it. And it's passing it back to you and your auditor as a team. So again, you or the auditor can log in and make the changes, but only the municipal administrator can actually submit it. So this is a little bit about the interface. To get to the 535, you're going to either click your financial tab or click the continue button next to financial home when you log in. And from the financial tab, click continue next to MS-535 review. So this is on the same page that you would use to access your estimated revenues above. So that's going to bring you to the 535 interface. And it's going to start off with a landing page. It gives you your review status right there. It asks you a question about emergency appropriations. Over on the right, you'll see your preparers and your auditor's contact information if it's two separate people. And all of that's editable, so you want to update it so that the DRA can reach out to people if needed. And then down at the bottom, we have a handful of buttons. So this is like many other parts of the portal. So let's talk about this section of the interface that you see. What we have here are a number of tabs across the top. So that breaks the 535 into a couple different sections. Below that, again, is where you would find the status. It'll say whether it's been submitted, reviewed, or flagged for resubmission. And we already talked about the emergency appropriations question, but if you do answer yes here, you're required to provide an explanation or it won't let you submit. Down at the bottom, we have a handful of buttons. Save and Home saves your progress, takes you back to your Home tab. Save and Recalculate keeps you on the MS-535 interface, so it just saves your progress and recalculates subtotals. The 535 Report button is what's going to bring up a draft copy of your 535 report in your browser. Once you've submitted, that's where you'll also run your final report from. And then finally, you have the Submission button. What's worth noting here is that the Submission button only shows up on this sort of landing page. So once we switch to the other tabs in the interface, you won't see that anymore. So if let's say you're on the Tax Commitment tab tomorrow, and you don't see a Submit button, it's because you have to go back to this Home tab. So let's take a look at the different tabs within the 535. We'll look at expenditures and revenues first. This account codes table probably looks pretty familiar. It's divided into two subtabs for expenditures and revenues. So it's just like your warrant articles and your proposed budget were. And then each of these tabs has a breakdown of the account categories on the left, and then all of the account codes within the category on the right. And these particular tables have three columns. Your appropriated amount, so that would be your voted appropriations. The actual expended amount, which is what you're going to be responsible for filling in, and then an explanation column. And this reason or the explanation column is kind of important if there are unanticipated revenues, which means that, for instance, you had no appropriations, sorry, unanticipated appropriations or revenues. So for example, if I ended up spending some money for personnel administration, account code 4155 to 4159, I didn't actually have any voted appropriations for that. So if I were to enter in an amount here, I'd be required to give a reason. And that's what your advisor is going to be looking at. Down below that table, we have a couple unique rows. Here we would enter our appropriated or expended amounts for any proprietary or special revenue funds, capital projects funds. This blue line is your commitments to other governments from the tax rate. And then your bottom line total for general fund expenditures is here at the bottom in green. So if we switch over to revenues, it's the same table and the same functionality. So account categories over on the left and account codes on the right. And again, just like with expenditures, if you have revenues that are coming in to an account code that wasn't used in your proposed budget, you'd have to provide an explanation because your advisor is going to be looking for that. So down at the bottom, we have those same special rows. This would be any revenues coming from those funds. You'll see your property tax commitment from the tax rate, for instance, from the year in the blue row, and then your bottom line total for the revenues. So the next tab to look at is the tax commitment tab. And this is a breakdown of the various commitment amounts. And it's so that you can compare your in-progress 535 against any other filings in the system. So this is really just for reference purposes. If there were county filings, if you had village districts, or local school districts, anything like that, you would see some of the numbers here. So it gives you an idea of where your 535 is with reference to these other government entities. So again, this is just for reference purposes. You don't have to do anything with it. It was just something that a lot of auditors had requested. The long-term debt tab is the next one that you're going to be responsible for. What we see at the top is just a summary of any outstanding debt at the beginning of the year. If we took out any additional debt or issued anything during that year, and then you can see anything that was paid off in the lower lines. And what we've got below that summary is a handful of amortization records in a table. Now, you may or may not have any items here. They carry over from previous years, but not everybody is going to have long-term debt. So there's a couple different things going on here. Again, this is pulling records from the prior year. So my responsibility would be to review and update these, and if I needed to add additional ones. If we paid off anything during the year or have to get rid of a record for any reason, there is a delete button next to each one. And then if I have to add new records, I have an add line button at the bottom. So after long-term debt, we get into the balance sheet. The balance sheet is probably, I don't want to say the most confusing part, but it's the most complicated part of the 535 for a lot of admin and auditing teams, just because there's quite a bit of financial information in this interface, and there's a number of calculations that get performed before you can submit. So this is going to look a little familiar. We have the same sort of sub-tabs across the top, only in this case we're looking at assets, liabilities, and fund equity. And then below that you'd see the contents for whatever tab we're on. Now, down at the bottom, these things are always visible, no matter what tab of the balance sheet you're looking at. And what we're seeing here are our beginning and end of year totals up here at the top. And then below that, we have a section for the general fund balance sheet reconciliation, and then our school districts reconciliation. And we'll come back to these in a little bit more detail. First, I want to take a quick look at the rest of the balance sheet tabs. All right, so we start off on the assets section. So most of these columns will look pretty familiar. You'll have a current year, beginning of year balance, and we pull these numbers in for you. So what you'll be responsible for is current year, end of year balances, and an explanation for any changes or adjustments or anything like that. Liabilities is pretty much the same thing. It does have one exception, which you're going to see if you, most municipalities have this. There's a line that says due to other districts. This is read only. So you can't edit these. Where these numbers actually get pulled from is that school reconciliation section that we saw a slide or two ago. So that bottom line total here is what's appearing in that liabilities table. And the last tab for the balance sheet is fund equities. So again, same functionality as assets and liabilities. We have a beginning year of column, then end of year column, and our explanation column. So just to get back to that general fund reconciliation section, because this isn't always intuitive if you haven't done a 535 before. What this section ends up doing is performing a couple checks for you. It's sort of a sanity check to make sure you haven't missed anything major on your filing. What it's going to look at is, does the difference between your revenues and expenditures for the year equal the change in your fund equity? Now, if you think about how municipal finances work and how money tends to flow, you can't have an imbalance here. There's some corner cases where it's possible, but 99% of the time, these two boxes are going to be equal. And if they aren't, if it isn't balanced, you're going to get that red message at the bottom and it's not going to let you submit. If, like I said, there are corner cases, if you're stuck in a position where they do not equal, that's probably going to be the point in time when you're going to need to have a chat with your advisor. We have pushed 535s through in the past where there was a balance difference, but it very rarely ever happens. It's pretty extenuating circumstances. But if you do get stuck here and it won't let you submit and you know you've entered everything correctly, like I said, just drop your advisor an email or give them a call so that you can review it with them. So that end of year totals check, the second check that this is going to perform when we try and submit is it's going to look at some things on our assets tab. So right here at the top, I have an end of year assets balance. That end of year asset balance has to match the end of year fund equity plus liabilities. If it didn't, as you can see here, they aren't equal because I haven't filled out this 535. If I tried to submit at this point, I would get an error message. So that's an additional check that occurs. Again, your end of year total assets have to equal the sum of your fund equity and your liabilities for the end of the year. Once I'm satisfied with everything, and I'm sure everything's accurate, then I would go back to the home tab on my 535 and I would submit it. And again, when you hit that submit button, it's going to perform those checks. So in general, it will catch errors for you, anything that you or your auditor might have missed. Like with other parts of the tax rate setting process, if you do make a mistake, and it happens all the time where something does get missed, but those arithmetic checks still work out, you can always ask your advisor to flag it for resubmission and pass it back to you and the auditor to make changes. So just some additional resources for you guys. Again, I mentioned reaching out to your municipal advisor. You can always find their contact information right when you log into the portal. It's in a yellow box in the top corner. And if you need to get in touch with our technical support team, or you want to go through help documentation or view short videos on the different pieces of this process, you can use the help link at any point in time in the upper right corner. So I know that was kind of a whirlwind if you're new to the 535 process. So I'm going to unmute the lines real quick and see if anybody has any questions.